Welcome to Consciousness Video Club. Every couple of weeks, a group of us will be talking about a particular video that is somehow approaching the subject of consciousness. This week, we looked at Black Mirror. Be right back. If you haven't seen this already, there's plenty of spoilers. Definitely recommend that you go check this out first. I went to Netflix, but there may be other streaming providers available. What were your initial impressions and any sort of initial thoughts before we get going through the story?
Yeah, I think first it was very strange, and it was, I suppose it just made me wonder how many real people we have. It made me just appreciate our life and the human connections we have with other people around us. But it also I think it just it awakened inside me a fear of really reaching to that stage where we could just substitute our human experience with some robots and some artificial intelligence that could just take over. But I think it gave me a bit of hope in the sense that it was very clear that there was something wrong with it. So when we go over the details of the story, I think we can discuss that more. It's no matter how much you feel you are sort of taken away by those of the artificial intelligence and how much you think that they can compensate about loss that you have had, there comes a point where you realize, no, it's just not real.
I think that for me, I know that GPT-3, a particular sort of general artificial intelligence, has come out recently, and the way that it can write about subjects and sort of put together information, it just seems absolutely astonishing. So I think that we're really facing a future where the prospects of what they're suggesting in Black Mirror really isn't too far from the truth. I mean, one of the first things I noticed, just as they're sort of setting the scene with this, is just the music choices, and I just thought it was such a wonderful way of communicating to the audience.
I can't have you, I don't want nobody, baby. You can't have you.
Yeah. From the start, it's just only you or fake you or no one else.
Right, yes. It just seemed perfectly set up for that. And then there was the Bee Gees, How Deep Is Your Love?
I know you're right in the morning sun. I feel you touch me in the pouring rain.
So we're obviously sort of painting quite a serious picture, but we're not. It wasn't done in a sort of a cheesy way. That the way that the sort of the banter worked between the two of them, and the way that they weren't perfect, sort of made, I think, identifying with them all the more real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And a sort of, so we have this sort of start to the story, and I think in terms of the story points, we pretty much have to sort of skip to killing one of the main characters. So the next point, which sort of at 9 minutes and sort of 29 seconds in, is at the funeral.
It's not real, is it?
But you see, we have to ask the question of what gave those sort of technologies credit to be existing in the first place. And then you might say, well, we've reached a very high level of artificial intelligence, so why don't we just use it in a way that could best serve us? And then now the real question will be, in such a situation where you can actually replace a human being with a fake human being, and if it serves it correctly, or fine, you can feel that, yeah, I can somehow feel the essence of that person with this fake sort of robot. Would you go with it or not?
And there's something to me that struck me, that it seems very kind of narcissistic of her to choose the robot, because what you're doing when you're interacting with a machine is you're not actually interacting with anyone. So you're not doing the interaction for the sake of the other person. You're just interacting with what you think with a machine that's going to react to you. So it's ultimately interacting for the purpose of them reacting back to you. And it's a kind of, I guess, solipsistic way of looking at relating to the world, where you care primarily about yourself and whether or not people are alive on the other side of what you see is irrelevant.
Is that sort of the idea that if I have sort of a robot friend who doesn't have needs or feelings or suffer in any sense, that they're really sort of my property and I can do whatever I want with them? It's sort of all about me. Is that the sort of thinking that you think sort of behind that? Or
well, to me it's more like, why would she want to interact with this thing?
It's not for its benefit.
Yeah, exactly. It's for her own, and this kind of mirrors, I think, like the way that people interact with social media today compared to how relations between humans used to happen. I think it's become much more, in the online world, it's become much more uncertain whether you're actually interacting with people, complex people who are really showing themselves wholly to you.
The next thing that struck me as somewhat amusing, but really important for the episode, was that she says,
"And don't worry, it's not some crazy spiritual thing."
I think the thing that really amused me about that was that it's a very clear signifier in the episode that we're not trying to make any claims like we might in sort of other shows. Sort of, if you take something like Altered Carbon, then the idea that there's this device that allows you to sort of shift your consciousness from one body to another, regardless of how difficult that might be, you sort of accept it as a story premise. So we're getting told very early on, very, very clearly, look, there's this, your boyfriend's not really behind this. This is a model. This is a sort of a simulation. It's an artificial intelligence. They're just very upfront with us. And it also, I think, there's such a large amount of uncertainty and a skepticism and, maybe we'd like it to be true, but it's just wishful thinking behind the word. I think for a lot of people, when that, I think that it's not some crazy spiritual thing, allows people to really put what's going on for the rest of the episode in a very precise context.
Yeah, and I think that this is it explains the sort of the danger that we might actually, like the dangerous level that we might reach at some point, and that is believing in anything that's transcendent to our human perceptions is something like crazy and outrageous out there, whereas believing in what we actually make and just make ourselves to fulfill us is the real thing.
I thought that was really ironic, that line. It's not just some crazy spiritual thing, because it's setting up sort of a dichotomy between, things done by science, by machines, to do with technology. These are sort of sane, we understand them, and so we feel safe with them. Whereas something spiritual, it's crazy, it doesn't make any sense, and it's we shouldn't pay attention to it. And then, of course, what the episode reveals is that this sane, sort of logical, scientific simulation of the human is much more disturbing. Even though we can understand it if we wanted to, we can look inside and look at the computer chips and see how it works. But it's much more disturbing than the actual human being, where you're interacting with, a person that is on the other side of that, that you maybe can't predict, but there's something real about it.
But yeah, it's more disturbing, but also it's within the structure of the story, it's deemed much more socially acceptable.
Yeah, and that's the irony.
Or at least
that's. Sorry, can I just add one point about this, because I think it's very important, and that is, you see, we came into this life observing what's around us from, our perceptions, and we tend to trust our perceptions to the point where we forget everything that sort of could, in any sense of diverge us away from what we see, what we hear, and we forget the profundity of our beliefs and intuitions. So we, in a way, sort of like become more robotic in a sense when we really get away from those maybe spiritual, but I'm not going to say spiritual, because I think people tend to spiritual is something illogical, irrational. So I would say anything transcendent.
I feel like you're describing sort of the way that we normalize to our culture to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Is that...
Yeah, in a sense, and trusting what we see, what we hear, rather than what we believe, trusting our intuitions, and yeah.
I suppose the next thing was just within seconds of the last thing that we're talking about, she's getting very upset at the funeral and basically telling this woman who's sort of presenting this idea to shut up. There's this real visceral rejection of this pitch right from the very start.
I mean, it's still in beta, but I've got an invite.
Okay, shut up.
You won't even have to do anything. I'll just assign.
Shut up!
And it sort of continues. So it's sort of at 12 minutes 3 seconds in.
It's obscene to use his name. His name, for God's sake!
So it's really strong feelings that we're talking about here. 13:34, and we sort of get the revelation that our main character is pregnant. And that becomes the catalyst now for, I think, reaching out and just sort of trying this idea.
She gives in to this thing that she initially sees as obscene. I wonder whether, because I often have this debate with my family about whether we're going to be replaced by artificial intelligence. And my mother would always make the argument that it's not going to happen because obviously we don't want that to happen. And we're the ones who are making the machines. So why would we make them replace us? And it seems that way, but I think people can be seduced by the benefits to their lives and the ease that technology brings. And I wonder whether if we could be completely replaced, if all of our actions could be replaced by technologies, whether we would end up doing that and then just fade away.
I think there's been talk in the past that sort of comes to my mind about economic automation. Who wants to go out and do a hard day's work if you can get a robot to do it for you? And I see things going in that direction. I suppose the question of being replaced by robots is, will that process go all the way? Will we want to remove humanity from every aspect of production and sort of creativity and producing the things that we consume, the services and the goods and all sorts?
Just as a first thought, when you were like saying that sentence of replacing humanity, and I just thought about natural selection and how we always fight for our survival. So for us to go from a point where we take any chance that could help us survive in our life and to maintain it to the best of our abilities, to shift away from that and then make a decision that we do not want that anymore, and or I'm not sure if this is actually the case. Is it that we want to remove humanity? Or is it that we want to do what's best for humanity?
I think that we see robots as a means of taking the hard work out of things, and we're already going down this path. I love my dishwasher and my washing machine, and this is the most there's a fantastic talk, TED talk. I forget the name of the speaker, but he was talking about how the availability of energy and sort of electricity and the innovation, sort of the first washing machines, how it freed people up from sort of the grind of daily life, so that they had more free time to do whatever they wanted with. And this, I love the machines that make my life easier, but I think I suppose if machines were doing everything, the problem is, why would we need an education? Why wouldn't we need the hard work of an education if machines were doing everything? I feel that there's a certain amount where, if humanity isn't engaged in its own progress, if we sort of give that up, do we get it back?
Yeah, and if we think about, will machines make our life easier? If we look at, the kinds of jobs that have been created, the kinds of jobs that have been replaced and the kinds of jobs that have been created, we're doing more difficult things now. So it's not that machines are exactly making our life easier. It's that if we are already engaged in a more higher order process, in a more complex project, then machines can replace the easier things that we no longer have to waste our time doing. And so it's only if we're striving towards outdoing ourselves and doing something more complicated, at least collectively and even as individuals as well, that machines will actually make people's lives easier. It's only in the context of actually trying to achieve something. If we're simply trying to live a peaceful life, it would be much easier to stay at a lower level of technology and just do what we have to do to live that life easily. And do things perhaps that machines can do, but that are also easy for humans to do.
Right, so it's my dishwasher doesn't mean that I spend my time sitting in the living room just sort of contemplating the mystery of life because my dishes are being washed. I could be working upstairs. It's a very nice point. Yes, that was what I think you sort of captured there, Johnny.
Yeah, but also, like, from this of what you've just said, Matthew and Johnny, it's like, we talk about the example when you replace a machine with an activity that could be actually done by a machine, but we've never actually talked about this human interaction and the human sort of, like, for instance, a person has a desire and it can only be satisfied by just another human being. Mm-hmm. So it's like when me doing the washing, I don't have a desire to go and do the washing. It's just, it happens to be that there's, a machine that could just do it for me. But I think the question is, we can replace machines with activities that just do work that we could do. Mm-hmm. But here it's like we're replacing machines with human to do, I don't want to call it work or like that job. It's because it's not a job, it's more than that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic distinction to make. Yes, and I think it is very important. We've got work on the other hand, and then you've got human needs on the other.
Yeah.
But then we get into the maybe troubling idea: what if our desires, our human needs, are ultimately just there for the purpose of guiding us towards survival and reproduction. And if that's the case, then the ultimate goal is not actually fulfilling our desires and needs. The ultimate goal is just this passive process of certain processes surviving and others dying off. And so, yeah, then in that context, does it matter whether we get replaced by a machine?
I think that we're heading in the direction of talking about experience as opposed to operational behavior. And I think I definitely want to come back to that point. Definitely want to come back to that point. I feel like we might have strayed a little bit from the story points, though. We were just sort of like, so I think perhaps it's best to sort of bring it back and then sort of revisit exactly what you're saying just a bit later. So the social media data creating this artificial intelligence. I'm not sure how far we are off this. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of AIs that can listen to, so I think there's something almost crazy like 5 seconds of voice data from someone and then produce a reasonable approximation of their voice. So you can go out there and find, I'm not sure if the Joe Rogan one was done with the 5 second clip, but it's definitely out there. I don't think that there's anything in what we're seeing so far in the video in Be Right Back in Black Mirror that is really too much of a stretch from what we can already do. It's obviously a bit further along, but it seems very reasonable.
Yeah, I've never heard of this, but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, I know about these because I've binge watched sort of comedic videos where they train the voice of Martin Luther King, for instance, from his speeches, get him to read the Bible or something like that, or get him to read Trump's inaugural address. There's all sorts of comedy videos and that, and they're quite convincing, some of them. Sometimes they don't get the pronunciation of certain words quite right. Like they'll like skip a letter and it doesn't sound quite right. But most of the time it's quite good already.
Okay, so I think the next thing on the story points is sort of recounting memories. And what I've got noted down here is that the model isn't perfect, but she talks to him. So I've called this virtual Ash. So we've got Ash, the original boyfriend. We've got virtual Ash, which is this sort of disembodied Ash. And she's going with it now. We've turned the corner. We've gone from this initial really sharp rejection to her accepting the fact that this approximation of her partner is now is incomplete. And she's sort of recounting memories and talking about things that they did, throwing a jab. That was one of the things that I don't think it's actually in my notes, but I remember it. It's this particular phrase. So she's teaching this AI to be more like Ash than its sort of initial state. So she's really running with it at the moment.
And then, like, straight away, I got a spine of a sea anemone or something stuck in my foot. And you threw a jab thinking it was poisonous.
What's through a jab?
Oh, it's a phrase we had, like throwing a fit.
Oh, okay. So I threw a jab.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you see that from the moment she meets him for the first, and I say she meets him as if he's like a real person, but I think for the sake of this discussion, I have to treat him as a real virtual person. Let's just go with virtual. But yeah, and I think you see, like how you said she accepted the fact that yes, she will go and do this and try it for the first time. But I don't think it's the acceptance. Instead, it's like actually it's like giving up and it's submitting to her like weaknesses. Like she had no choice, so she was like, I have nothing else to sort of like hold on to apart from this. So her going there is like, maybe she had a bit of hope that this actually could work. And you can see that how she was trying to teach him, like, yeah, but Ash wouldn't say that. Ash wouldn't do that. You go do this and just do, like, it was very like fake, but you can see it across the sort of like the series of like sort of actions where she was trying to teach him. It was hopeless because it was like an algorithm that you follow. You have an input and output, and you always just get the same response. You can't change the algorithm. Yeah.
It could adapt, but it would always be using the same strategy. Is that sort of?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh man, there's a really good example of that. But it's quite a lot later on, so we'll have to come back to that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, this whole plot seemed to me like she was trying to teach this robot to love, basically. That was the
I think is she really sort of hoping that Ash is going to come back to her through virtual Ash, through pseudo Ash, which is what I call the robot Ash. So it's not quite Ash, but it's not quite virtual either. But I wonder if she's just sort of hoping that maybe it will be enough like him if she gives it enough of a chance.
Yeah, perhaps, but in any case, this is a kind of theme that appears a lot in science fiction, I think, of trying to teach a robot to be like a human. And I was looking at that phrase. I wrote down the phrase "teaching a robot to love," and I was looking at what that actually means. And robot is, I wrote down the etymologies. Robot is from the Czech word robota, which means forced labor. So a robot is like a slave, which is basically somebody who doesn't express their own will. They're expressing the will of somebody else, the person who designed them, or we told them what to do. And then love, of course, is linked to an old Sanskrit word, lubhyati, which means desire. And so desire is kind of the direct expression of the will. And so what the paradox is, the way that science fiction keeps coming up with is this idea that if something is like a simulacrum and it doesn't actually have a will of its own behind what it's doing, what it appears to be doing, then it doesn't really have desire. So it might seem like there's something, but there isn't genuine love because there isn't genuine desires. It's just creating images. And so this, I thought this idea as like the central paradox was interesting.
I think that's very interesting, actually. It sort of like summarizes the whole of the episode, is that robots, they don't have will. And since desires, they come from, as you beautifully said, as an expression of the will itself, then it's like, it's just so simple. I cannot have a desire to love since I don't have will in the first place. So, yeah.
It's making me think of Daniel Dennett saying that we're all robots made of robots made of robots.
But that's very, and you see this in a lot of this kind of circularity, a lot of thinking these days. I won't go into the connections. Yeah, I think that's a circular way to think of the world. Like doesn't Daniel Dennett also say that consciousness is an illusion? And therefore, we're just images interacting with other images, and there's no subject ultimately.
We're all doing creatures. We're all what creatures do. We're all operational. We're all functional, but there's no feeling. Feeling is just an illusion, and it's all functional.
Yeah, and that's like reality stripped of any metaphysics, right?
I think it's a really interesting one. I can't see as someone who does software development how I could ever put feelings into a computer program. I can give something that has sort of an illusion of them. I can sort of present you or maybe make you feel things with what a character says or how something behaves. I'm sort of thinking of Bob here as well, who eats food. And when I programmed Bob, and I could see this little creature with the little dots for sort of like not quite nostrils, sorry, and he'd go around and eat food. I did sort of look at him. It's quite cute, actually, but I know there's no feeling behind it. But Bob is purely functional as far as I can see. But I also know that I'm not.
Yeah.
I know that I'm not purely functional. I know that it does feel like something to be me. Shall we go to the next story point?
Yeah.
So I really loved this one, actually. This is one where I was watching it, sort of like taking notes for this discussion. I'm like, aha, oh, that's quite interesting. And it was the at 23 minutes and 48.
Shit.
When she gets the new phone, she charges it up, she plugs it in, she gets everything working again.
What happened?
I dropped you. I'm sorry. It was just. I'm
Hey,
sorry.
it's all right. I'm fine. I'm not in that thing, you know. I'm remote. I'm in the cloud.
It makes me like wonder, like, what does that mean? I'm in the cloud, but you're already here.
My God, what a metaphor, right? I mean, all of the conversations that we have sort of about consciousness, life and death and all that sort of thing, all the philosophy of mind. And to have a phrase like that, I just thought it was wonderful and priceless.
What did you think of it? Like, why did it struck you?
Well, because that has a very technical meaning for me. It means that what's going on is the processing of, I should probably have led with this actually, that the processing of everything that Virtual Ash is doing and all of his functional behavior isn't getting worked out on your phone, right? It's not getting worked out, and the Ash isn't actually in the phone. The phone is a relay for Ash's for the servers that are working out what Ash will do, which are in the cloud. They're way off somewhere else. They could be anywhere in the world, and you know the functions could hop from one server to another. It's this nebulous idea that they're just sort of out there somewhere, and that's such a gorgeous and amusing parallel between the way that so some people see themselves as their consciousness as not being in their heads, right? So we've got this really fascinating comparison. Obviously, you know, if we when we normally think socially of something bad happening to a person, right, bodily injury, we sort of think of them as being in their heads.
Yeah.
You know, but depending on your view and your philosophy, you can see yourself as sort of a consciousness that sort of sits outside of space and time, is just having this human experience. And I just that one line of the whole story, I thought was fantastic, very thought-provoking. Sorry, guys, jump in.
Yeah, this is a really great metaphor, which I've thought about a lot in the past. This idea that we use, I mean, symbolically, for hundreds of years, we used this idea of the clouds as this nebulous place that maybe we go when we die, or, you know, that hides the heavens from us. And it's kind of, everything is sort of not defined and vague, and it's the kind of, maybe kind of a conception of heaven, right? It is cloud-like. And then we've actually started sort of replicating this kind of concept and the concept of immortality as well with our technology in the last few decades. And there's a poet, I don't know if you've come across him, called Michael Aaron Kamens, who's written a poetry collection called Clouds. And if you look it up, it's basically about this idea of the clouds, both as you know, the real clouds, but also as the place where all of our data is being stored in you know, in the hypermodern world, like.
That's like the sentence, you know, after you, Matthew, what you've explained, like what he meant by "I'm in the cloud." It's like I'm just non-local.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Are we ready for the next story point, where we go from a virtual Ash to a sort of pretend robot pseudo Ash, right? Not the original human being, but we've got a physical instantiation of Ash.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that I found really intriguing here, right, it was the way that this is put across. So it's sort of 28 minutes and 7 seconds in, to the episode, Virtual Ash disappears from the phone during the process of activation.
I have to go in a minute.
Oh, don't leave me here with it.
Sorry. Look, you can hear. It's starting already. Don't switch the bathroom light on.
So this is almost suggesting that he's not in the cloud. It's like the cloud can't sort of power the phone while it's sort of putting him into this physical. It's this handoff idea, right? He can't be in the phone and in the body at the same time. We have to have this transition from one to the other, and you can sort of hear that starting to happen. I thought that was quite interesting, perhaps a little bit almost contradictory in a certain analytical sense, but a really interesting story decision to make in the way that it's told.
Yeah. Why do you think it's contradictory?
Well, if Ash is in the cloud, then Ash doesn't need to disappear from the phone to then sometime later reappear, sort of in any sort of changed form in robot Ash.
Yeah.
Ash could just sort of swap the processing like almost instantaneously from the phone to the physical instantiation. Or there's no reason why you couldn't have two Ashes, two interfaces to Ash. You know, he could be on the phone and sort of pop up in the body as well. There was no need for that, technically speaking. In fact, you could even have, you could be on the phone in principle to Virtual Ash, saying, do you remember to get so-and-so? And then the robot Ash is like, yeah, okay. You know, they could have been completely synchronized, but there was this artistic decision that the virtual digital soul, I'm being poetic here, of Ash would transfer in some sort of ceremonial fashion from the phone to the body, even though that seemed to be a little bit in contradiction to the way the story was working previously. But it was fine. I don't mention it as a nitpick so much as I think it's somehow telling. I think that perhaps we needed that when we were watching the story. We wanted to sort of like, we were being mentally told and prepared that Ash was not going to be in the phone anymore. It was going to be in this body instead.
And you could make the excuse that the company, you know, the theoretical company in the episode does this as a procedure in order to have a ceremonial event for the customer.
Yeah, I mean, they could have also said that the processing hops from the cloud into some sort of different sort of artificial brain that was in sort of Ash's head, but it was left open, which is fine.
I think the point was is they're trying to make it as real as possible. You see how you described you could have had, you know, Ash being on the phone while sort of like appearing or coming out from the bathroom. I mean, you could, I don't know if that's what you meant, but you could have had that possibility, like as if like, hey, I'm here and I'm talking to you, but it's just getting more and more disturbing, I suppose. So I think to fit this sort of, you know, the people who will watch the episode, to make it just as real, like, yeah, I'm going to now transform from that sort of very sort of, I don't know, imaginary Ash, but seems real, to this, to reincarnate in a physical.
Yeah, he's getting
I have to say, it was a kind of like a big jump between the two. And it was just, it depends now on the watcher how he will sort of interpret what happened or what's the reason. And yeah, interesting.
The way that they set it up was interesting as well. Don't switch the light bulb on. Don't switch the lights on in the bathroom while I'm turning into actual Ash.
Don't what?
Don't switch the bathroom light on. Let it through. I've got to go.
Back to where we started.
I was confused because his voice broke up in the recording. in the episode,
Mm.
and I was expecting her to accidentally switch the light on and then something horrible was going to happen. But it didn't happen, so I don't know why they put that in.
I think it builds up the apprehension. We're sort of like, is this going to go wrong in some sort of horrible way? Well, we shouldn't switch. We shouldn't look at this particular. Is that because we don't want to see what's actually there? Is it that we don't want to break the illusion? Is it something sinister? It was a nice dramatic point to put in, I think, but it kept it going in an interesting way.
If I just may say one point, I think, you said they didn't want to break the illusion. And this is something that, we as human beings, we've never actually seen it happening. I mean, apart from, watching birth and, the children coming into life, we haven't actually seen, nothing turns into something. And I think watching this, it's like we've just seen the truth of what's behind this thing that's pretending to be something, or a human being.
Yes. I like that.
Hello?
It's so we're getting to, I think, what becomes a really interesting point in the story now.
It's texture mapping. The really tiny details are visual. 2D.
And the fingertips are mentioned.
Try my fingertips.
That you can sort of feel that the texture of the fingertips isn't quite the same, even though they might look right. And I thought that was really interesting, because he's sort of saying, I'm not exactly the person that you're looking for, but I can be if you believe in me a bit.
Does it bother you?
Yeah.
And she's not quite, she doesn't seem to be quite sure. It's like, no, yes, no. And we get a few more minutes in, and then we get the I love yous.
I love you. I love you.
And so I think that we're really at a point of acceptance at the moment.
I think it's not like a point of acceptance for her. They're just looking at his body, and he's much younger than the real Asher. It's like, I think what she was going through is more of a like, I just don't believe what I see. And she's like in a point of like just being sort of self-aware of like what she brought herself into. So I don't think that she actually reached that level of like, okay, so this is you. You're not the same as, the Ash that was before, but I'm going to accept you. I don't think that she was actually there yet. Thinking about how she have received this, he's quite young. And she's young too. So for her to receive the that he died, and then she went, I'm not sure about the period of time between his death and when she decided to do that, but I suppose it was quite close. So I think she's like just, she's not even having any opinion of him. She's just like making it flow and tell me more about you. Well, okay, so it's like she's trying to discover him more and more.
How about though the I love yous, the exchange of I love yous? 35 minutes, 17 seconds. What's going on there?
Who said I love you first? I think
I'd have to go back and check to really know. But I think it was her.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think she wants it to be true to the point where she's convinced herself that it is. That's what I think's going on. That she's convinced herself it's good enough at this particular point in the story. She's going, I want this to work. This is good enough. I love you. I feel that's a point of acceptance of Robot Ash as a replacement at that point.
I see. And you know what? I would. I think the I love you. She said I love you from the same position where she went up to him saying, Ash wouldn't do that. So even like her motives of saying I love you were the same motives of teaching him to be the real Ash.
Right. This is another one, isn't it? She could be just trying it out. How does this feel? If I do this, what does it feel like? What's going to happen?
Yeah, but even like though like she was like doing that, I don't think that she was actually accepting him.
Yes. I might be just taking this too much at surface value. Yeah. I see what you're getting at. All right. So I suppose the next thing, if we want to move on with this, if there's nothing else that's in anyone's mind, would be the arrival of...
Oh God, shit! Right, get in the bedroom.
What?
Now.
Her sister.
Yeah.
The sister arrives, and that's brilliant, I think, because that really tells us a lot about how she's behaving when someone out of her bubble of what's going on, and she's apprehensive as to how they'd react. She's got to be thinking something. She's certainly not thinking to herself, oh yeah, my sister will be totally fine with what's going on here. I won't make any effort to hide it. She's not doing that.
Yeah.
Well, what do we think's going on there?
I mean, isn't like the reason why she didn't want her sister to sort of know of what's going on, same sort of like reason that led her to say shut up to that lady in the first place.
Shut up!
Oh, I think it's similar, but I think that the shut up's the rejection of a proposition. They're linked for sure, because in the same way that she rejected it, I think she anticipates her sister to reject it in a similar fashion. So in the same way that she said shut up at the beginning, I imagine that she possibly thinks that her sister's going to go, what are you doing? You know, we wanted you to be moving on. We wanted this, that, and the other, but what? You've got a robot version of your ex. I mean, I think that's what she's afraid of. She's afraid of the confrontation with reality.
How we perceive such a thing. So she
yes,
perceives it as an undermining of the real person. And this is how her sister look at him. And also will look at her sister herself, as in you're undermining your real Ash to bring someone else.
That's a good point you made, that she's afraid of the confrontation with reality, I think, because that's what led her down this path in the first place. She didn't want to confront the fact that Ash was dead and she was going to have to raise their daughter herself, and or find someone else, and instead she just went and tried to find a simulation in the past and try to hold on to memories in this kind of technological virtual simulation world. And her sister represents just this link to reality, I suppose. And she rejects it.
I think what makes this so interesting as a story as well is that it felt very much culturally many years ago, in sort of like the era of something like Short Circuit as a film. The premise of the film was something like, you know, Johnny Five is alive. You know, the robot's been struck by lightning, and the robot's alive now. And in this episode, it's yeah, we know Ash really isn't alive. so let's not tell anyone. It's almost like the opposite partner, you know. Yeah, I feel that this is where reality starts to become awkward for her at sort of that main protagonist. She breaks a glass.
Are you sure everything's all right?
Yes.
I think that there's a sort of a tension that builds up from her sister visiting that then needs to be resolved, because it's all very well kidding yourself about what's going on in a situation or wanting to believe something, but then when you have to hide that thing because somebody's come round, you can't then, when that person goes, return to how it was before. You've got to deal with the fact that your first reaction was, oh, hide the madness, or whatever it was, hide the thing that I deemed to be unacceptable. And I think that the glass breaking represents some form of the illusion breaking as well. I think that's a very deliberate, dramatic choice in the story, and I think it's a really nice symbolic way of punctuating it as well.
Yeah.
Can you just go downstairs?
Okay.
No, that's... Ash would argue over that. He wouldn't just leave the room because I'd ordered him to.
Okay.
So they're having some sort of argument, and she tells him to get out. And I think this is where we start to see the biggest wedge being driven between what we perhaps might want our robot impersonator of a relative to be versus the way that it's actually going to behave. That it's not going to argue back with you. It's not going to say, no, I'm not going to leave the room. I feel like this about you. And it's starting to behave a bit more like an appliance at this particular point, where it sort of has to respect her wishes, or it sort of has this, at least this sort of default approach of, well, he told me to leave the room, so I'll leave the room.
Yeah. And
she's not happy with that.
It was just nice how, you know, when she first sort of like, you know, received Ash, she was speaking to him as like, you look young, you look something, and she was just you. And then by time she switched, Ash wouldn't, she would just use Ash as a separate sort of like human being, a separate entity out there, and you're just different. And it's like a point of realization, I suppose. And I think what you said, like, I really, really liked how you said, you know, the breaking of a glass, it wasn't just something like this. It was, the break of an illusion. It was like a reminder of, like, you see this fear that you had when your sister came in. This is like something that you're going to face for the rest of your life as long as you have that thing there.
And it cuts his hands. But he doesn't.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And that just drives it deeper, doesn't it? Because there's no blood.
Yeah, or like when she told him that you had a mole here, and then suddenly it appeared.
She seemed more accepting of that, though. She seemed like she'd be more willing to go along with that, because that's Ash becoming more real.
He had a mole there.
To what Ash was.
Yeah.
We're being faced with fundamental limitations. You know, robot Ash can't make blood start to appear from a wound, right?
Yeah.
So this is
not as far as we know, and certainly not as far as we see. So it's instead of seeing his potential to be or to live up to Ash, we're seeing the fundamental ways in which he can never do that.
I see what you mean. Yeah, it's a very good distinction to make.
Yeah, and if I suppose, probably an obvious point to say, that if the breaking of the glass represents the breaking of the illusion, it's the sudden pain, the harshness of that enables this realization. By cutting him, enables this realization that he isn't an actual human. He can't. He doesn't have blood, and blood is always, symbolic of, a very human, mortal nature, and passion. So this kind of thing.
Prickers, do we not bleed? Well, not robot Ash. I think this sort of, particularly from Ash saying that Ash wouldn't have left the room, it's really escalating quite quickly at this point.
You're not enough of him!
I think that whereas we can sort of ask questions earlier as to, whether when she says, I love you, is that superficial, or she's trying it out. She's just being really honest here. She's just saying, you're not enough of him. Yeah. So we're watching this sort of transition of his character occurring. Perception. The perception of what he is changing, and what he can be. The perception of what he can be is also changing. And then this is it's. I just feel like there are certain things that just make a story feel like it's done particularly well, and I just absolutely love the fact that at 44 minutes and 6 seconds we return to the Bee Gees, and now remember he's not Ash, because he's got no interesting thing to say about the Bee Gees. He's just sort of a quippy comment on all the beautiful, like, sort of teasing and playful stuff that happened in the beginning with him sort of singing along.
I know you're right in the morning sun. I feel you touch me in the pouring rain.
How Deep Is Your Love is now gone.
Cheesy.
It's not there, and he has no idea, and she's not prepared at this point to play the game anymore. She's not prepared to say, oh, but you loved the Bee Gees and you sang it like this and you made a funny voice and you were really playful. Could you do that? She's not asking him to perform anymore.
No. And I think it was a very short scene that just explained the whole story. This is the real, it made the distinction between the real Ash and the virtual Ash, or the robotic Ash that we called him, so clear that to the point where she felt not hopeless, but she knew that there's no way that he could be him. Why would I even blame him for it?
Yeah. So we get to the cliff face now, don't we? And he would have worked out what was going on.
See, he would have worked out what was going on.
They're at the cliffs.
You're just a performance of stuff that he performed without thinking, and it's not enough.
It's just a performance. I liked that particular line. And I think we're getting quite close to the end of the story points.
Just on that note, I can't remember the exact sentence, but from what you've said, a performance of the things that he performed without thinking.
Yes.
You have nothing to do with thinking. You don't even think. You just do it. So I think that's very crucial.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It raises the
human main characteristic of Descartes. I think, therefore I am. You just take this out.
Yeah, no, we're making a really interesting distinction here between performance and thinking. It really makes me wonder. Gosh, it's the way I want to phrase this, but I have to phrase it this way. What are they thinking when they're talking about thinking? What is it that comes to their minds when we say think? Because the performances can be very complex, and we've got to acknowledge that Ash's performance has been incredibly complex, and it's about to get more complex than that. He's standing there at the cliff, and then we have sort of the last point on the note. Well, the last point in the story before sort of wrapping it up at the end, which is, I think that sort of you look at 45 minutes, 47 seconds in, and you can see Ash, almost like the moment on his face where he's like, right, I'm not just supposed to be nice, I'm supposed to plead for my life.
Oh God, no. Please, I don't want to do it. Please don't make me do it.
No, that's not fair.
No, I'm frightened. Darling, please, don't make me. I don't want to die.
And you can see that performance that Ash is doing start off a bit bad, but then it starts to get better because she's pleading, oh no, don't pretend. No, it's not fair. It's not fair. And then he's like, oh yeah, no, this is what she wants. So, from a performative point of view, what he's doing is, it's not hitting the mark, but it's not bad, right? There's some sophisticated performances going on here. And I think that, well, what do you guys think at this point?
I suppose you see, the way how you framed it, sort of phrased it, and said that how and I think you've mentioned that in the notes, is the transition between one state of performance to another, as if there was a metacognitive behavior going on inside his, I don't know, his brain. I mean, can I even say his brain? And it makes me wonder, then that's say that this is a very step one. But how far can it go? And if it really like it reached that level of like knowing of like I should act in a way that could satisfy the other person's sort of like desires, then this is so far. It's really going so far.
Well, this is now we're pretty much at the end of the story points, except for saying exactly what happens to Ash in the end, and maybe it would be best just to leave that for people to sort of think about by themselves without commenting on it too much. I mean, you know, if you watch the episode, you know, I mean, maybe you'd like to throw your sort of your thoughts into it, but this is really, I think, the height of the whole story. One almost wonders if Ash had just been able to play the part better, what would have happened? Yeah. What would our whole story be if Ash was better? If Ash more closely resembled, sorry, if our robot Ash more closely resembled human Ash, if they just got the technology better, it becomes not just a question of was the story talking about something that was fundamentally missing that artificial intelligence could never recreate. What did she need him to be a feeling creature, or would a sophisticated enough performance have been enough for her?
I think what was missing, there's a point in this story quite near the end where just after she sends him outside and he leaves the house and then goes and stands in the yard 20 meters away because he can't be 20 meters away from his bathtub.
Yeah.
And then she calls at him from the window and he calls her my administrator.
What are you doing?
I can't go more than 25 meters from my activation point. I have to keep within a 25-meter radius unless my administrator, that's you, is with me.
And I thought that line is fantastic because it's like, yeah, administrators, the one, you know, you've seen the icons on your desktop to call you the administrator. So she's the one in command of him, and that's particularly unsatisfactory from her perspective. She wants someone who you know has their own will, who can love, right? But if he's only sort of mirroring back what she's telling him to do, it just isn't enough.
Yeah, I think that is a really important point. I completely agree with you.
And you would wonder, like, if we manage to make artificial intelligence that does have a will of its own, like, what would that look like, maybe?
Well, I think
Would it be convincing?
the way that I see it at the moment is that artificial intelligence is it's performative. It's all behavioral. There's no point where I ever, well, I mean, we could do it in theory, I suppose. It's the difference between artificial intelligence and artificial sentience, isn't it? Yeah. When do you create something where it feels like something to be that thing, and that feeling thing then is influencing the way that its behavior turns out? So
do you think that sentience has something to do with the will of the creature? Well,
I don't think that we can define will without sentience, because I think everything else is just performative otherwise. If something doesn't want to do one thing or another, then it sort of looks a bit more like a machine to me. So I think that artificial intelligence, as we currently work with it, is that structure. It is that performative thing. Do I think that it could get sophisticated enough to fool people? Quite possibly. I don't see any reason why will can't be simulated, approximated, performed as if it's there.
Yeah.
And is that what Daniel Dennett thinks we are?
I think that he completely denies the frame of us being subjects having experiences. I think that when I've tried to sort of analyze what he says, you're always stripping it away to what things do. not what it feels like to be things. It's just about what things do. There's nothing else going on. I mean, I think that sits in contradiction with some of the other things that he says. So I don't think he's entirely consistent. He talks about feelings and whatnot. He accepts the language that we use normally, but when he creates sort of an intellectual justification for what's going on, it always reduces down into behavior. That's my take on it. And I think that coming back to the story, I think the sweet thing about the story is that we're being asked these sorts of questions and we're being invited to think about these things on the basis that there would be bits missing from the scenery. The illusion wouldn't be completely compelling. And I don't think that, well, this is where it gets really tricky, right? Would you be able to tell? Would you be able to tell if there was a feeling something behind the person that you were talking to, or would you get taken in by a good enough simulation, a good enough approximation of those behaviors?
And is that perhaps where we're heading? Towards a sort of world where we won't be able to tell at all, because simulations will be so integrated into our lives and so convincing that, yeah, it'll be difficult to tell where the sentience lies. And when that happens, do you think that?
Well, Charlie, if you're watching, that's the episode we'd like to see next. It would be interesting, but I don't think it would be as good a story, because I think you'd lose the audience. I'm not sure how you'd have a story where you told people, yeah, I know it looks exactly like Ash, and I know it's behaving exactly like Ash, but it doesn't feel like anything to be this thing. It's pretend. I think that would be so hard to communicate in a story.
Oh, just probably one last few comments to conclude what I think about it. I just skimmed over the notes that I've had, so I'm not going to talk about these of some of the things that came up towards the end, so just leave it for the audience. But I think one point that I want to say is that we as human beings, we tend to pursue perfection and look for perfection in our lives. However, when it comes to human interactions, it turned out that we don't really we like humans to be imperfect. Like, look at I had there's no need for food for him, toilet, nothing, and he could satisfy all of her sort of sexual desires, and he can be accepting everything that she tells him to do. I mean, if he was like a real human, she would probably like this, but turns out that she doesn't like a yes man, or it's something that just does what she tells him. So it's like we really look for imperfection. We like our flaws when we it's not that we like them, but we enjoy them in the sense that we try to change them in each other's behavior. And she couldn't feel that from him because she hadn't really she didn't have to challenge him in any way, because he was just very responsive, like I would just do everything you tell me. So I think that was like a point that made me realize that we are really very beautiful with our flaws too. We don't have to be perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think perfect would be intimidating. You want someone who you feel can understand you. And since all of us are growing, since none of us are finished products, then how could someone who seemed like a finished product, who seemed perfect, how could they possibly understand you? And if you don't have that understanding, how can you have any connection?
Yeah. That's so deep. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's where we need to wrap up, really. So I'm not sure if we've decided if how we feel, or whether people would be able to detect the difference between a sufficiently advanced, like, I don't know, version 10 version 10 of Ash. What would have happened with her, you know? I mean, it would have been a bizarre story, wouldn't it, if somehow he performed almost identically to actual Ash.
Well, we wouldn't be asking this question in the first place, because we wouldn't be able to tell that he's just not Ash.
Although, yeah, we wouldn't be able to tell. And would it? I wonder, like, what right have we to say that the inner life of a person to kind of close that off and associate it with and sort of definitely associated with their particular body is a robot, or is sufficiently, seemingly a robot that simulates human behaviors well enough? Are they not, what makes them different from us that we can't associate an inner life with them?
Well, I would say that the key difference in my mind is that the experience I have of my inner life isn't something that I've been taught to come out with, right? I don't say that it feels like something to be me, because it doesn't, but I've convinced myself that it does, right? I think that I recognize that's what I am. I'm this sort of experiencing being, right? And it's obvious to me all the time, should I care to check. It's the way that I experience things, the way that I see color, the way that I hear things, the way that I feel things, just all these senses. And this is, it's very David Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness. It's that wow. It's the way we get surrounded in this sort of almost a movie of our lives, with all the sound and the visuals and the smells and the textures and all of the sensations, and then to just sort of recognize that I'm that thing that's having that experience. And when I talk about all of that, when I talk in the world, I'm not just performing that that's true. I'm saying it from a point of truth, right? So I'm saying this is how I experience things, and I'm relaying my mental experience through the physical world. And that's just not something that I can see is possible to do with conventional computers, software, and logic, and all of that stuff. So I think that we're always going to be fundamentally trapped when we're trying to simulate a human in a robot, that we take the bit that comes from, we take the self-reports of consciousness, and then we have to go, well, what does that sound like? If we were trying to take all of this, the spiritual stuff that people come up with, the philosophy of mind, and we condense that into a performance, so it sort of looked like there was something going on behind the eyes. If we just worked that really hard, we'd have this end product, and it would look like there was something going on in that software. But we'd know from examining the software what the cause of all that behavior was. And it wouldn't come from any soul. It wouldn't come from any consciousness. It wouldn't come from an experiencing being. It would just come from the software knowing what to do to perform as if that was the case. And I think that's quite a frightening idea, because how would people really know? It could be very confusing.
But Matthew, can we say that if there's, as you're saying, something going on behind the eyes, is it really behind the eyes? Is it in some location?
I'm speaking figuratively. I know you're very, very right to call me on that. It's just figuratively. I'm not literally saying that the locus of consciousness behind my eyes. I'm using it as a metaphor, I suppose.
Yeah. But what I've been wondering about, maybe a bit too skeptically recently, is if this consciousness that we have is, or that has us, if you like, is not really located anywhere. It's not located inside any material bodies. It doesn't belong to this or that person in particular. Maybe we can't say that the robot has their own particular personality, but it is expressing something.
Well, it's only expressing patterns as far as I can see, unless its ability to talk about its feelings actually comes from some sort of thing that's having feelings, right? So yeah, I think that sort of covers all of the episodes. Thank you very much for joining me, Noor and Johnny, and I'll catch you again next time.
Yeah, well, thank you, Matthew, for setting this up, and thank you, Johnny. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. It was very wonderful.